there was the Dublin-Kilkenny Railway that went from Dublin to Kilkenny, and that's as far as it went. And then they extended it to Waterford. Now, up to that time, the Waterford station was out Bilberry, the other side of the river. And that's where Allied Iron Founders was, that's where the station was. So they built a beautiful station. I hope you're going to get a shot at that, because it was a beautiful, everybody nearly, when they knocked it down. He came to Waterford as the first station master of the new station. Now, my father's family were all old men. If they were, I suppose if they were 20, which in my age, they were old men. But they were old men when I was growing up. And I only knew one of them, Uncle Bill. And Uncle Bill lived in Christenham, where there's just the other side of the bridge. Sorry, out past where you came in this morning, there's a whole shopping place there. Not shopping, but living. Yeah. And my grandfather used to bring me, he was, not my grandfather, my Uncle Bill used to bring me for some reason or other over with him. I was 5 or 6, over to Christenham just to play around and all the rest of it. But almost every time when we were passing the station, he would say, "That's where your grandfather was the first station master." And the Dublin, this off by heart, and the Dublin-Kilkenny Railway made one big mistake. They gave him the wrong office. And they said that because the office they gave him looked out on the bridge. And at that time, all the goods being exported came in by train to the goods station in Sally Park, and then were brought by horse and cart over to the other side of the bridge to the quay where they were loaded on ships. And all the imports that came into Waterford came in on the quay and were loaded on the horse and carts and brought over to the railway. And Timbertoes, that bridge, it was a toll bridge, so they all had to pay something to cross the bridge. Any cattle crossing the bridge, and on certain days pedestrians had to pay. And he saw all this, and the first thing he did is he bought the toll for the bridge the next time it came up. So the money then went to him. And he ended up, there's a book that, listen, if you ever get it, I'd be very grateful for a read of it. A book called, it was written by Smokey Joe, or J.J. Welch. He was the owner of the Munster Express. And it's called something like Waterford, All Our Yesterdays, or something like that. But John Murphy is mentioned in that, and the fact that he had almost 400 horses and carts. Now, even where do you park 400 horses and carts? Like, you know what I mean? So he made his money there. He then, on the north side of the river, he got the railway to extend the railway across the road to go in on where the north side wharfs were. And he eventually had 3 coal boats running from Bristol to Ireland every week with coal. And they unloaded on the north side, and some of it was loaded immediately into, again, he did nothing about the railway, the coal to be brought to other centres. And then beside that, he had a coal importing place for locals buy their coal and all the rest of it. He then built a sawmills, and he then built, he built, I believe, now I don't know, I have no proof that it was the first, but this is what I'm told. It was the first coal briquette making machine in the country. And there's a picture of that as well in the National Library. And so that any of the coal dust, it wasn't swept away, it was mixed with cement or whatever, that. And the last thing he built was a salt, what they call a salt cellar, because at that time there was no refrigeration, and all the goods, at least all the meat being exported, had to be salted or put in brine, as the case may be. Now, he had all that, and I haven't a clue what he did with the money. Pardon?
He never got the money.
Oh no, he was a very wealthy man. As a matter of fact, you will notice Poole, the photographer, by the way, who was married to an aunt of mine, he took many pictures of John Murphy's businesses in Waterford. That's where I got him from the National Library. But he's one of the few people who he's never referred to as being John Murphy. It's always Mr. Murphy. You know what I mean? And there's one lovely picture of Mr. Murphy and three of his sons on his yacht at Giles's Quay. And it's frustrating for me because my father could be in that photograph, you know, but I never know because there's nobody who can say that was your father. Too long before. And they also had, there were 7 brothers in the Murphy family. And I'm not sure it was 2 or 3 daughters. But the 7 brothers, they all played cricket. And Uncle Bill one of his boasts was that there was always at least 3 Murphys on the Christendom Cricket Club team. I remember asking him one day, he used to get very annoyed at some things, was that because they owned the field? Actually, the field was always known, the older people in Waterford refer to a field over near Clovermead as the cricket field, you know, because that's where they played. And I also found two photographs of the team. And again, my father could be in them. And I wouldn't know. There was one other thing he was mixed up in, and I knew he was mixed up in Waterford, in Tramore. You know where the sandhills are? Well, you walking down the sandhills, all the land on the left-hand side of that was the Waterford and Tramore Motor Racing Club's grounds, and he raced cars there. And then one heavy storm, the sea broke in, and that was the end of it. I had very few photographs of my father, but a friend of mine, one time I met him, he said, there's a book you'd be interested in now. It's all photographs of Tramore. And I opened it I said page 43, and it was a photograph of the Waterford and Tramore Motor Racing Club committee. And there was my father in it, and I recognized him straight away because he had white hair from the time he was 21. You know? But that was the only decent photograph really I ever saw of my father, that.
What was your father's name?
Chris Murphy, or Christy Murphy as he was known as.
And then what was Christie's, like you said about your grandfather?
Yeah. Well, what did he do?
Yeah, what did your father?
He was a ship's engineer originally, but then he came back and he settled down in Waterford, and where Murphy Engineers was is at the end of O'Connell Street. If you drove right straight across, there was an entrance there to a yard, which was a coal yard, which was one of the Murphy brothers' coal yards. And he bought that, and that's where he set up his engineering works in there.
Which would be kind of next to the Green Bank.
Yeah, exactly. There was the Green Bank, and then there was this big double gateway, and then a little newspaper shop there. So he bought that house, number 4 Bridge Street, and he had the coal yard behind it. As a matter of fact, the whole place was always referred to as the yard. It was never the engineering works or anything else. Even the workers there, they always say, "Where is he? He's in the yard." That was it.
And your mother, then, where does she come from?
And my mother was, it depends on when you ask, because her father was Matthew Young. And as far as I know, he made his money in the gold fields. I don't know whether it's California or Alaska. But he made his money, and he came home and he built a house at the corner of Polebury and Ballytruckle. And it was known as Waterloo House. And if you... I was looking for photographs of him in the National Library, and I couldn't find any Youngs. But when I put in Waterloo House, I found a photograph of, first of all, I found a photograph of my grandmother with my mother, aged 10 months, sitting on her lap, taken in October 1900. And then I found a photograph of the whole family in 1905, taken by Poole, and another photograph in 1911 of 8 or 10 of all the children, you know what I mean? And they're fascinating photographs because you can enlarge them and they won't sort of break up into pixels, like, you know. Yeah. Or they're all plates, yeah. And there's also, if you're looking for, you probably know this, but Annie Brophy, when she died, the Waterford Corporation bought all her glass slides. Now, I'm telling you, I don't want you to put this in the book, but it frustrates me a lot. My problem at the moment is doing nothing. You know what I mean? I worked all my life, and I went in one day looking for something for the antiquities office in the corporation over in High Street, and they were telling me that they had all Annie Brophy's photograph glass slides, and thousands of them. And I was telling them that the National Library had bought everybody else's. They had all the professionals. They bought their glass slides, and they bought them about 40 years ago when they didn't know what they could do with them, but they didn't want them lost to the country. And then about 15 years ago, they discovered they could digitize them. And I said, why don't you digitize the ones you have here? Oh, he said, we can't, we're in a bit of a recession at the moment. And I was thinking, and I went back to him and I said, look, I said, I'm doing nothing. And I would love to spend, I wouldn't spend 8 hours a day doing it. I said, but I'd spend 2 or 3 hours, 3 or 4 days a week at least, digitizing them. You know what I mean? And I said, I could probably do at least a couple of thousand a month for you. So he said, you'd have to put it to the corporation. And he did. And the union wouldn't allow it because I'd be doing somebody out of a job. And I said, but I'm doing it for nothing. And they said, no, it's the principle of the thing. Now, I wouldn't like you to put that in, but the reason I'm saying is all those photographs are there, and there's photographs of places as well as things, you know.
Well, that really annoys me. There's 60,000 plates.
Yeah.
60,000. We can't see it.
They won't let you ask either.
No, should they have them digitized?
No, well, you see, you could scan them.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? But they won't let you at them. Yeah.
Anyway, just go back.
Yeah. Well, why I say, my maternal grandfather, Matt Young, he was a wealthy man as well. And as my poor grandmother used to say, your poor grandfather, he only had 2 vices, drinking and gambling. So he didn't need any more. But at one stage, he sold some land to the corporation down one side of Polebury. That's where they built all the houses. Polebury came from these houses. And he was the first tenant in one of the houses because he went bankrupt. Yeah. And my mother was moved from the lap of luxury in Waterloo House, where the upstairs and downstairs maids and all the rest of it, and to 48 Polebury, a house that had 2 bedrooms and an attic. And the young family and their 8 children were moved in there.
That's amazing. Yeah. And sorry, just go back a little bit. You said that one of your ancestors was married into the Poole family.
Oh, yeah.
Who was that?
I think it was Robert Poole, and I think her name was, I'd have her name at home, I haven't it on the top of my head. And they had on the Mall, well, as you can see the pictures.
And where did you go to school then as a child?
Oh,
where did you live?
I went to Water Park. Oh, sorry. My father died in 1935. All my aunts and my mother had gone to the Ursuline. And I was only 3 years of age when my father died, and my mother was trying to, the business in Bridge Street was nearly bankrupt, and she was trying to put it together, like, you know. And the nuns in the Ursuline said, "We'll take Bill." So I started my education in the girls' school. And then when I was 5, one of the nuns wrote to my mother and said, "I think it's about time you took Bill out of here. He's trying to teach the girls to turn head over heels," which was probably as close to a mortal sin as you could get at that time. And then, so then I went to St. Declan's in Water Street, and I was there up to the end of the national school, and then I moved over to St. Patrick's to De La Salle, the secondary school. And then in 1946, my mother sent me away to Newbridge College for the last 3 years of education there.
Where was Newbridge?
Newbridge in County Kildare. It was run by the Dominicans, the same people who were across the road from us, like, you know.
And sorry, Bill, just where was your house then as a child?
Oh, 4 Bridge Street was, Daddy bought that with the yard. And when he bought it, there was 2 ladies, the 2 Miss MacDonalds. They had the newspaper shop. And he divided the house into 2. So he had one half of it and there were only the 2 Miss MacDonalds. They had the shop and the other half. And as a matter of fact, because of that, nearly every room in 4 Bridge Street had 3 doors in it. Because they just split it up, and then they put extra doors in where they wanted.
So you were brought up there?
I was brought up there, yeah.
Which is really interesting, because you're right
Pardon?
in the town.
Sorry?
You're right in the middle of town. You're in the centre of town.
Oh, yeah, yeah, right, yeah.
And sorry, Bill.
Yeah.
Have you any memory of your father?
Only 2. And I'm not even sure. I have a memory of 2 men. There was a man called Paddy Hickey, who was manager of Texaco oil place. They had an oil place just outside Waterford on the New Ross side. That was one of Daddy's friends. And I have a memory of, and it was to Paddy Hickey's house that we went. He had a house in Dromore when my father died, and he kept the 3 of us for, I have a brother and a sister, and he kept the 3 of us for 2 or 3 weeks when my mother got over the thing. So.
But do you actually remember how he looked around your father?
Oh, no, I can remember. It's the white head I can remember, because I can remember another day when I was over, my Uncle Bill was a great horsey man. He was sell horses, he was buy horses, always fascinated me. he was buying horses for the Swiss cavalry. Now, I never even heard of the Swiss having an army, you know what I mean? Because they were tucked away in Europe then. But he was always mixed up with horses. And I remember I was up on a horse, and of course I was about 10 feet up in the air as far as I was concerned, and this man with white hair was holding the horses. That was probably my father, because my Uncle Bill, like myself, was bald as a coot, like, you know. Yeah. Yeah. I tell you another fascinating thing about my mother. They decided when they were in Poland, my grandmother took over then. My poor grandfather, that was the end of him doing anything, you know what I mean? And they decided that the boys would finish their education, but the girls would all leave school at 14. And my mother was 14 in 1914. And it was, the World War had started, and there was quite a number of people from Waterford joined the army and fought in it. And they ran short of telegram boys in Waterford. And they made a big management decision at that time, they would employ girls. And my mother's first job was a telegraph girl, delivering telegrams. Now, for the most part, the only telegrams you would be delivering were to mothers whose sons had been killed. And the rule was you couldn't leave the telegram in the letterbox. You always had to deliver the telegram to the person to whom it was addressed. And my mother, she used to come home, I believe, crying every night from this. And she got to the stage, at one stage during the second Battle of Ypres, as it's called, where if she turned into a street, the women at that stage could be leaning out, there was half doors on most of the houses, generally, you know what I mean? They're chatting to each other. And when they see the telegram girl coming, they'd all lock their doors. They didn't want any of that news.
That's a terrible story.
Yeah. And she said, I was very lucky. She said, I got a grand peaceful job next. Do you know where a grand peaceful job was? It was over in Ferrybank in a munitions factory that was over there. And she was making shells for the war. But this was the grand peaceful place she was in. At least she didn't have to deliver any telegrams over there, you know.
And like the war, well, I mean, as you say, Waterford was very British town.
Oh, it was. As a matter of fact, my Uncle Bill and I don't know which of the other, they fought in the Boer War from 1898 to 1901. My mother used to tell me that my father, every night the radio used to go off at 10 o'clock and they'd play God Save the King. And himself and Paddy Hickey would stand to attention for God Save the King while it was being played up there. But that's, I know very little about the First World War, like, you know.
But you were alive during the Second World
Oh,
War.
I was, yeah. Oh, that was great. It was because, you see, two things. Number one, during the Battle of Britain, what the RAF used to do, if at all possible, was come between the German bombers and going back to Germany. So they would drive them west. And they'd drive them west until they sort of ran out of petrol, and then they would just crash land in Ireland. You know, as a matter of fact, they say that it got to the stage in Tremor that there was relatively so many German planes landing that when the military came to collect the pilots and crew, they went straight to the Majestic Hotel. And they'd find them all in the bar of the Majestic Hotel. As a matter of fact, I don't know, I haven't been in Majestic, but the propeller from one of them was over the bar in the Majestic long ago, anyway, you know what I mean? Yeah. And there was one other thing about the Air Force. They could not understand how the Germans kept landing because they had tar barrels in all the fields. You know what I mean? So that had stopped landing there. And they asked one of the pilots, how did he manage it? He said, it was thanks to your tire barrels. You have them all lined up in lovely straight lines this way and that way. And all we had to do was look at the washing on the line, and we knew which way the wind was blowing, and then we picked our runway.
That's great. Yeah. And Bill, you were, as a child, down in Bridge Street.
Yeah.
Can you just give us a picture of what you remember from that?
Well, I can, because I was a spoiled rotten. As a matter of fact, if I was a delicate child, and if I just, my mother was changed for, Dr. Purcell was her doctor, and I think he got very annoyed about the whole thing, because he came up one time, and I was up in bed, so he went up to see me, and then he came down to my mother, and she said, will he be all right, doctor? He said, I'm afraid he won't. He said, he needs an operation. What kind of an operation? And he said, it's called a matricide. What's that? Is that serious? Yes, he said, he has to be cut away from his mother. And he said, surely, he said, some of the lads in the yard would take him out home, and he could cycle into school every day and get a bit of fresh air every day, you know. So the Cornelius of Galls Mills took me when I was about, it was before the war started, I was about 6. And I used to cycle in from there to school every day. And then I fell in love with the farm, and I wouldn't even go away on holidays with my mother. I used to spend my holidays out there as well. And I learned to be a farmer's boy and take the milk to the creamery and all the rest of it. I tell you one funny thing, I was coming in one day, the war had started at this stage, and at Smart's Castle, there was a public water pump at Smart's Castle. Listen, if I'm going on the wrong street, just say, shut up. But there was a water, you know, one of the hand pumps there, and I was saying, there was this fella, and he was wrapping, what I call a sugan, it was a straw rope, around the pump. And I said to Johnny Welch, who was cycling in with me, I said, Johnny, what are they doing there? Oh, he said, the war's on now, he said, and they're camouflaging the pump so as the Germans wouldn't know where to get water. I said, and when I was cycling back that evening, the whole thing was finished, but there was no, this was just to keep it from getting frostbite or whatever pumps, you know what I mean? There was no sugan on the handle, or there was no sugan on the spout. And I said, God, those Germans must be awful stupid people if they didn't. Gosh, I fooled myself.
But go back to your memories of Bridge Street.
Now, Bridge Street.
And also the engineering. Tell us about the engineering race. Your
Huh?
family. Tell us about the family.
Yeah, well, for a start, our auditor was a man called Matty Brazel, whose son Donny has Brazel office near the Dominican there now. And he came over to my mother about 2 or 3 weeks after my father died, and he said, there you are now, Mrs. Murphy. That's a statement of affairs telling you what the business is, and you have your trading account, you have your profit and loss account, and you have your balance sheet. And she said, Matty, I don't know what does it all mean? And he said, if you get in all the money that's owed to you, and you pay all your bills, you'll have £76, 17 and 4 pence, that's it, left. That's all. She said, that's all. Oh, then she said, I better run the business. She said, no woman can run a business. And she said, well, no woman can rear 3 children on £74 either. So she decided she was going to run the business. And Matty said, you will have to take in a partner. No woman can do this. But anyway, she went out, and it's the lads in the yard. There was about 12 fitters there and 3 or 4 apprentices. But she called them in and said she wanted to do this, you know. And they said, well, ma'am, we'll give you all the help we can. And they did. And she often said she could never have done it. She didn't know the difference between a nut and a bolt, you know, at this stage. But she ran it, and Matty Brattle came over a little later, and my mother was having a cup of tea in the kitchen, in the house, when he came into her. And he said, I tell you, no woman can run a business. And he said, but I've taken in a partner, she said. Oh, thanks, Peter. Do I know him? I'm sure you do, Matty. Who is it? He said, there he is on the mantelpiece. And she had a little statue of the infant of Prague. And this was her, the post would come in the mornings, and the halfpenny letters, she called them, the brown envelopes. You know, if she got 5 or 6 brown envelopes, that meant she had 5 or 6 bills, you know, and that'd be a lot. And I often remember she said, good God. And she turning around to the infant of Prague and she said, look at that, you're doing nothing. I have to get £30 for the wages before the end of the week. And you're doing nothing. And you know what I mean? Anyway, herself and the infant of Prague did run the place. And made a wonderful success of it. But it was the men there were fantastic. There was a strike. It would be somewhere around 1948. There was a strike of the Waterford fitters. And all the men came in to my mother and apologised, say, we have to go out on strike, but ma'am, don't worry about it. And don't worry if you hear noises in the place at night. You won't lose any money by this strike. And at that stage, my brother was an apprentice in the yard, and there was the only other person in it was one of the fitters was the manager, a man called Pat Tierney, and they used to picket outside the gate every day, and then at 6 o'clock they'd go home, and at 7 o'clock they'd be back, and they would go down Mary Street and go in the back door into the Green Bank Bakery. And they had already put a ladder up against the wall of the Green Bank yard. And they climbed up that, and there was another ladder, and it was about the same size as here. Another ladder, and they'd come down, and they'd work all night. And then they'd go back out and pick it during the day. I don't know how that thing last time, but my mother kept the whole thing going, like, you know.
Well, she must have been a formidable woman.
Oh, she was. And she wasn't 6 stone. We often said if we'd known sooner, we'd have made a jockey of her, you know. she was nothing flapped her. Yeah.
And can you remember any other businesses around that area?
Oh yeah, next to us was, next door, number 3 was Brady's. And Brady's was a Clonmel firm that had opened Brady's for bikes in Waterford. And the manager of Brady's was a lady called Miss McGowan. And when I'd be in there at the shop when it was sort of 5, 6, 7 type of thing, you know what I mean? And Miss McGowan and myself were great friends. I came into her one day and she said, there's a man down the yard doing something and I'm not sure what he's doing. Will you go down and just, don't say anything, but just say, just see what he's doing, go back and tell me, you see. So I went down and it was a rat catcher. And he had a hole in the wall and he'd put in his hand and he'd pull out a rat and he'd look at the rat and he'd put it in the bag. Or he'd look at the rat and put it back in the hole. And I just came back and thought it meant nothing to me. But it's a couple of years afterwards, she said, remember that what the rat catcher was doing was, any rats that were pregnant, he put those back in so that there'd be more rats to be caught later on.
Keep yourself in the job.
Keep yourself in the job, yeah. I used, when I did accounting, I used to go in at night and help her with the books there and so forth. And especially on, every night we'd count the money. And she had a safe in the room that was, the house was broken into a couple of times, but the safe, they never managed to open the safe, but she never put the money in the safe. When we had all the money counted, she bundled it up in newspapers and threw it in the waste paper basket. Yeah.
Yeah. And who else last week?
Then the next one was Corcoran's. They had a sweet shop, and then they had a bar. And the sweet shop, poor Mrs. Corcoran, they had 9 children there. And Mrs. Corcoran was the first person in the street to get a bathroom. And Chris, Marion, and I used to go down there every Saturday night, and we get a bath down there, and then we'd be changed into pajamas, and we walk back up the street in our pajamas and dress together, you know. And we were always fascinated with the Corcorans because Mrs. Corcoran, during the war, chocolate was rationed, and she used to take half the box of Cadbury bars up to the house for the children. If you're down in college, you always get a... Yeah. And we used, during the war, Tom, Alfie, and I, we all had slug guns, as we called them, pellet guns, you know. And we used to shoot pigeons. And Flanagan's used to buy the pigeons for 1 6 a pair. That's 9p a pigeon. And they were all exported to England then, you see, to feed them. And they used also buy... Huh? Oh, yeah. Oh, God, yeah. And they used... when I was out in Keneally's and Gall's Mills, living out there, I learned from one of the local lads, a chap called Paddy Pender, he became my best friend when I was out there, how to snare rabbits. And on a Monday morning going in, I always had to go in a bit earlier on a Monday morning and make sure my mother didn't see me, because I would have 4 or 6 rabbits hanging off the handlebars. You know, just the poor sick child who was going out there. And they used to pay 3 and 6 a pair. Everything was bought by pairs. They used to pay 3 and 6 a pair for...
And who buy it?
Oh, Flanagan's again, yeah. And they used to also buy blackberries. And you had to be very careful how much water you added to the blackberries. So it wouldn't seep out again, you know.
And Bill, do you remember down towards the brewery?
I do. I remember, the first thing I remember down there is Mr. Traynor was the manager of IAWS, the Irish Agricultural Wholesale Society, whose stores were just the second block of Bilbury on the quayside there. And he had a car. I remember it was a Ford V8, it was a company car. And Mr. Traynor always had his car serviced in Wade's garage on the quay. That was on the second block of the quay. It was a Ford garage. And I thought that this was very bad because my poor mammy, she used to repair anything. She had a hoist and all in the yard for cars. And I thought it was the height of boldness for that man to be giving his car to... And I had a little pedal car. And children were quite safe. And I'd go off in my pedal car, what I call around the rock, down the footpath, around, you know what I mean? And nobody bothered you one way or the other. So what I did was I went into the yard one day and I picked around, and the welding rods they used to use, when they came down to about 3 or 4 inches, they couldn't use them, and they just dropped. I collected some of these, and I drove off in my little car, and there was nobody around. I waited then, and I propped one up against each side of each wheel of Mr. Trainor's car. So that when he got into the car, and I was only about 4 at this stage, when he got into the car to drive off, he should get at least 1 puncture. I never knew how many punctures he got. I was waiting further down near Miss Cantrell's, as it was, until he came out and got into the car, and I got at least 2 of the wheels, if not more. But as soon as he got into the car, I skedaddled, you know. But when I came round again, it'd be about a quarter of an hour later, the car was still there, and he was jacking it up. So they had Miss Cantrell then was also in Mary Street. She taught music, piano. And we had a piano, and I thought I'd go in down there for a lesson, and then I'd come back up and play Chopin's Polonaise or whatever. You know, it didn't work out like that at all. But she had, and she'd give you exercise. I can still play some of the, I can't play the piano, but I can play some of the 5-finger exercises on anybody's piano. But she used, if you hit a wrong note, she had a carpenter's pencil. Did you ever see a carpenter's? The carpenter's pencil was about that length, about that thick, and she, not hard, but she wrapped it on the knuckles. And that inspired her not to make any mistakes in future. Then down at the end of May, and the second block was Strangman's Brewery. And it was Strangman's Brewery and it was Cherry's Brewery. But and Sir, I forget his name, the man who owned it anyway, he had WI1 was his car now. I can't remember his name. But he had the first motor car in Waterford. And he was allowed to keep the number forever, like. And and we used to play, oh yeah, the Waterford Sack and Bag Factory was on the front of that place. If you went down Mary Street and turned to the right, at the other end of that was the Waterford Sack and Bag Factory, where they hired out sacks to the farmers for they only had, the main business was in August, September, but you know, when the wheat notes were coming in. But they had loads of women there repairing sacks the whole year, getting ready for next year.
Did they hire them out?
Oh, they hired out the sacks, yeah.
So they didn't own them?
Huh? No, they just hired out the sacks to the farmer.
And then they returned
Oh, yeah. And it depended on how many days the farmer had them. And they always got a deposit from him. And the man who owned that was...
Were these jute sacks?
Huh?
Jute.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, a sack was a sack as far as I was concerned. They were probably, well, the jute factory was in town as well, so they were probably... And the man who owned them was called Willie Watt. And he was also, he had a Chrysler. All the owners of the businesses had American cars. And they always stuck to the same one. Clover Meats now, they always had Ford V8s. Powers Nurseries just across the road, their place was just across the road there. And they were Chevrolets, you know. And Sam Morris, he had a coal yard up in Bridge Street on the left-hand side, up beyond the Dominican, on the corner. And he was a Chrysler man as well. No, he was Dodge. It was funny that they all stuck to their own one, you know. And I remember the first, show you how good I am at prophesying the future. The first car I ever saw, we had trafficators, as they called them, the thing that came out the side of the car and lit up. You know, but in the wet weather it would get rusty and you'd have to bang it on the inside to go out so you know. But I saw... Huh? Yeah. And then Willie Power, who was the man who owned Power's Nursery, I remember him coming around the corner of Lombard Street and I coming up. And this winking light on the front of the car. And I said to somebody, "What's that?" I said, "That's the new trafficator." And I remember saying, "Well, that'll never catch on." So I was a shrewd bio in this.
And just, you mentioned a couple of names there. Just talk about the Quakers.
Pardon?
The Quaker business.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Charles James Hill, opposite George Weiss. Joe Hill was the man who owned that, and his brother. And he was, he was a bad-tempered man. We used to do his audits. You see, Brandon Ferguson Company were Protestants. So we had all the Protestant business in Munster. But one of the things with the audit was to get a signed certificate as to the value of the stock. And you'd have to have that signed by the owner. And I was, at one stage, I was sent up when we had finished the audit of Charles James Hill to get the stock certificate signed. And I also had one for Sages, which were just down there, the furniture factory. And I had one for them. And I went into Sages and I got that one signed. And then I went up to Joe Hill and I got his one signed. And just as he signed it, he said, "Good God, this isn't my certificate at all." And he said to Sages, "The Sages get mine." No, I lied with fervour. I only had the one. Well, take it back, get me a proper one. I thought he'd kill me on the spot, like, you know. So I had that for years at home. I didn't tell the boss, you know. I got one of the typists to type it out again and brought it back up to him.
So you did the accounts for all these companies?
Oh, no, I worked in, I didn't do the accounts. I was just a junior working in.
Who did you work for last night?
Pardon?
Who were you working for?
I worked for HB Brand. They're no longer there. They were a Belfast firm, HB Brand and Ferguson and Company. And I was paid, my mother had, I'll tell you, just to show you the times, it might have nothing to do with what you want to do. I started off in St. John's College to be a priest. Because my mother, we used to say the family rosary every night, and my poor mother, she used to also say, in the trimmings on the rosary, she had one for a very special intention. We never knew what this was. I found out afterwards for me become a priest, which I didn't. But, oh yeah, I couldn't do the priest business. So I rang my mother. The thing was, you ring your mother, you tell her you can't do it, and would she come up and collect you on a Sunday morning, you see? And I rang my mother. And it says a lot about my mother, because this was wonderful having a child a priest. There was a really, you know. And I rang my mother. I said, "Mom," I said, "I'm sorry." I said, "But this is not the life for me. I want to come home." And she said, "Oh, good God, Bill, it's a good thing you rang." I said, "Why?" She said, "I had a bit of bacon for the dinner today. I was going to have it cold tomorrow. I'll go out and get a roast beef from John Joe Breen." You know what I mean? And she came up and collected me on the Sunday morning at 11 o'clock. And she sent me down first thing on Monday morning to Hearns to get a sports coat and pants. We were all dressed in black to see whether you were going to be a priest. Oh, I know why I brought it in. When career guidance. Now, this is my career guidance. The Monday morning, sitting in my new sports coat and pants at the table when my mother was at 11 o'clock having a cup of tea, and along came Mr. McGrath, who was manager of Easton's. They used to distribute the newspapers and magazines and so forth. He came in, you see, and, "Oh, Mrs. Murphy," and he gave her the bill for the week. And then he said, "Oh, hello, Bill." And then he just turned to his mother and said, "Why is Bill home?" "Oh," he said, "he's left. He's not going to be a priest. He's going to be something." And what are we going to do with him? And Mommy says, I don't know. "Is he any good at sums?" "Oh, no boy ever better at sums. Always first in class." One time he got 95% for his sums. And Mr. McGrath says, "We'll make an accountant of him." And then he said, "There's a firm down on the Mall, Brandon's, and I think they're looking for an article clerk at the moment. I'll go down and see." I wasn't even said, you know, I wasn't there. Anyway, he rang my mother later on and he said, would Bill go down for an interview on Thursday? And I went down for an interview on Thursday. And my mother paid £250, which is a lot of money, for me to be an apprentice in that place for the year. And I got paid, for my first year, I got £15 for the year.
1 5.
Yeah. I got £20 for my second year. I got £25 for my third year. I got £30 for my fourth year. And I got £36, £3 a month for my fifth year. And from the time I was 2 years plus, I was doing complete audits on my own. And he was charging 7 guineas an hour for my time. So that's £7, 7 shillings, like, you know. It's just to give you an idea. And that was all my career guidance.
But that's amazing that people had to buy in.
Oh yeah, but the same with my mother. I don't know what the apprentices, but they had to pay as well, and because we had 2 members of the one family there, and only one of them took an apprenticeship, and the other just wanted to be a labourer, as they called it. You know what I mean? And of course, he was getting far more every week at the beginning. But as soon as the other fellow qualified, and both of them were said, the fellow was qualified nearly had twice the money of the first, and the 2 of them were still in the engineering works, like, you know.
And here, Ferguson,
Yeah.
you mentioned Brandon Ferguson.
Yeah.
Were they the people that owned Shaw's that we...
No, that was Robertson, Ledley, and Ferguson, a different Ferguson. Yeah. But my J.C. Ferguson, he was head of the Freemasons for this, for Munster. And one day and Miss Barton, her family had a farm over in Ferrybank. We always refer to it as Barton's Creek because that was a real cowboy picture at the time. But Miss Barton, and she was a Protestant, she was the chief woman in the place, you see. And it didn't matter what the rest of us were. But one day when Mr. Ferguson was away, and I was always up to Divilman, he had left, there was a case in his office which had all his robes in it because he had the Masonic outfit, you know, sword and all. And I came out brandishing the sword in the office. And so Miss Barton nearly had a heart attack in case anybody ever saw me.
And on that subject,
Yeah.
like, we say the Catholic business people,
Yeah.
Protestant business
Yeah.
people, and the Quaker business
Yeah.
people, was there any...
No, there wasn't. We used to, all the big companies in Munster, we used to do Latchford's in Tralee, a huge hardware place. And there, all the bosses were Protestants, and all the rest were Catholics, right, you know. And I remember Mr. Waterstone was the company secretary, but all the locals refer to him as Wet Mibs. And I remember being down there one day, and there was Pacho. Pacho used to bring in the cup of tea in the morning, and all the bosses were away somewhere. And he came in, he shut the door of the office where we were doing the audit, and he blessed himself. And he said, "Gentlemen, isn't it great to have the place to ourselves for a day as Catholics?" So that was it. There was no enmity between the lot, you know what I mean? But at the same time,
You knew who was who.
oh, very much so, yeah.
And you would never have gone into a Protestant church or anything in the school.
Well, I could tell you, we were, as I say, in St. Excellence, and we used to walk home across the park, down Constance Street, up Colbeck Street, and then down High Street and over Constance Street home. And the trainers next door in the Greenbank, they used to go to St. Declan's as well. And we were talking, I don't know how about children to talk about it, who was the bravest of us? And Paul Trainer said he was braver than anybody, and he proved it on the way home. And do you know how he proved it? When we got to the top of Corby Street, we went around by Christ Church, which was closed in the rain, but he put his hands on two bars, he stuck his head through the railings, and he spat. And as soon as he spat, the rest of us ran. We didn't know what was going to happen, but we didn't want to be there, like, you know.
Well, that was very brave.
Oh, that was the bravest there was. The sages, they were Protestant. And,
Wait, just 1 second.
yeah.
What is the time? I just want to check.
It's 9 minutes past 12.
Is it 12:30? It's not. Keep going.
Yeah.
Sage.
Huh?
Sage. We're saying the sages.
Yeah. They were Protestant. And, but most of their customers were Catholics, you know, for the cheaper stuff. You know, they had sort of special lines for us.
Did the sages were sage to furniture people?
Yeah,
But
but they made furniture as well. Their shop was just on the next block there.
but somebody later on, because I remember Hearns's and Swift's
Yeah,
did church furniture.
yeah.
Did Sage?
No, the Sage didn't do any. It was furniture for the sitting room and the parlour and all this kind of thing. Yeah, but they something came into my head now when you said that. Actually, it'll come back again probably. But we had Cavendishes were over here as well. They were a pay by the week. So I remember for my 21st birthday. What I got for my 21st birthday? I got a wardrobe on which my mother was paying 4 and 6 a week. I think the poor woman died. I got a wardrobe and a dressing gown. And when I came home from work on that, they go up and see your bedroom now. And all my clothes were hanging on nails on the door. Even my bedroom now had three doors in it. Remember I was saying earlier on that, 3 doors in. And on 2 of the doors, there was nails in the wall. And that's where all my stuff was hung. And there was a wardrobe. And my dressing gown, sure, whoever had more in all their lives.
That was very fancy.
Yeah, oh, it was. Yeah.
And can you just about, you were talking about St. John's College.
Yeah,
Training.
yeah.
How long were you up there?
I was only there for about 6 months. Yeah.
And you had been away to boarding school before that?
Pardon?
You had been.
Oh, I had, yeah. I had.
So it wasn't, you weren't scared of being in a boarding school?
Oh, no.
Okay.
And up there, we were taught everything through Latin. And I found, like, in your first 2 years, you're doing philosophy and logic and these kind of things. But I found my notebooks a while ago with, they're all in Latin. I couldn't read one word of it. And I can still remember the definition of philosophy is philosophia est scientia rerum omnium per ultimus causas. I'm not quite sure what it means now, but you know. And we were taught French by a father, not Cassidy, Castlereagh, who had a cleft palate. And he'd come in and he'd say, now, gentlemen, say, yeah. And we'd all say, yeah. And he said, no, yeah. That's the only French I ever learned when I was up there, anyway.
So, Bill, just how did you meet your wife?
I met my wife when she was about 3 years of age. I did. I met her in Corcoran's, and because I got very friendly with her brother, Eddie Brennan, and he's still alive. He's up in Delgany now, but we meet fairly often. But I knew her sort of from that stage, and I used to go over to Brennan's. And Mr. Brennan, he was general manager at Clover Meats. And I ended up marrying the boss's daughter. And a year later, I left. Alice wouldn't marry me until I was earning £10 a week. And Mr. Brennan wouldn't give me £10 a week until everybody else was, he was terrified. Well, I can't say he was terrified because he was a great businessman, but he was terrified of showing any favoritism towards me, you know what I mean? Because I used to call him Dada. I was going over to Brennan so often. I'd be over there for my lunch and everything, you know what I mean, during the holidays when I was at home. And
Where was their house?
pardon?
Where was their house?
Their house was, it's now past where you were in this morning, down there. It's Christendom House. It was that stage. It belonged to Clover Meats.
Yes.
Clover Meats bought all that land there, you see. And the Murphys had been in it before him. And Uncle Bill sold it to Clover Meats. And before that, the Murphys had been in Rathcollaheen House, which is out further. It's a much bigger house. And when the Brennans, they left, they went the other way. They left Christendom and they went to Rathcollaheen House. They bought that later on. So we were keeping an eye on each other the whole time. But I knew I loved the meat business. I really did, and I couldn't get enough of it. But I saw an advertisement in the Sunday Times for a bacon factory in Scotland, looking for an assistant manager. And now I'd been a few years in Clover Meats at this stage, and I knew I could handle that job.
Sorry, but you went from being an accountant.
Oh no, sorry. I never qualified as an accountant. And there was another two people in the office who had never qualified, and they were sitting on high stools. You know what I mean? And they'd be there still if the place was there still. And I didn't want to end up like that. And I was going to emigrate to America. Now, I spent all my whole life with the Brennans. I call them Dad and Mama. I call them all the rest of it. And I never knew, but I think my mother spoke to Mrs. Brennan to see could I get a job in Clover Meats so that I wouldn't go to America. Because I was to fly out to America on the 18th of September, 1950. And I got the job in Clover Meats on the 11th. And it was only the previous week. I used to go over every Sunday morning. I used to open the shop at 5:30 in the morning, on a Sunday morning. Well, I wouldn't open the shop. I go over and get the papers and bring them over to the shop. And the first bus came in from National Board and Paper Mills, which was out at Granny. They used to work all around the clock. And my shop would be open. And they'd all buy their cigarettes and everything else. The bus used to stop on Bridge Street and they get out there, and most of them would come in to buy something or other. And then when the women came in at 8 o'clock to Aisha, I used to go over to Brennan's for my breakfast. And then Mr. Brennan and I, often we'd walk out where Abbeylands is now. He kept his cattle. There were fields there. And we were counting the cattle, or leaned on the gate one day, and he said to me, "Did I hear you were going to America?" He always spoke sort of vaguely, you know. I said, "I am. And when are you going?" And I said, I'm going on the 18th, in a couple of weeks' time. And he said, "What are you going to America for?" I said, "I don't want to end up an accountant." He said, "We're looking for somebody in the costing office below, and I'm sure your knowledge would be good for us. Would you be interested?" I said, I was looking for a job somewhere here. I said, "Well, I'd be interested in going to see." Well, he said, "I'll ring your mother on Monday, and I'll see, will Mr. Wallace take you for an interview?" And not only did Mr. Wallace take me, I say Mr. Wallace was terrified to say no, to be honest about things. But as well as everything else, my daughter married Jerry Wallace's son eventually. But anyway, he took me, and I was doing what they wanted, but I didn't know what I didn't know what a gammon was. You know what I mean? Or a shank, or this, that, and the other. And I said to Jerry, who, like everybody, was terrified of Mr. Brennan, I said, could I come in? No, could I go down to the factory, I said, when we're not busy, just to see what all these things mean? You know, because the information would come up and I would doodle and give the answer. And he said, I better ask Mr. Brennan about that first. So we went in to ask Mr. Brennan about that, and Mr. Brennan said, if he's prepared to waste some of his own time, I'm prepared to waste some of the company's time. I said, what do you mean? He said, you come in for factory hours and you leave for office hours. Now, the factory used to come in at 7:30 in the morning. The office came in at 9. The factory was closed usually at 5 o'clock in the evening, and the office closed at 6. You know, so he got me both ways. But I was able to, I learned an awful lot, just asking questions. And I loved every minute of it. And then I went to, they had another factory in Limerick, and they were going to put in a cost accountant into Limerick. And they sent me up to do that job. And I had learned so much about the factory, I could see there was an awful lot wrong with the factory, and the figures I would be producing would be based on wrong information. Like, I was very lucky now, because the first thing I noticed was, the first day I was talking to the charge hand in the canning department, and when he finished the production, they had turned out, and it was on the meter there, 7,777 cans. You see, and I was chatting to a lovely Pat O'Connell, and I saw, and he wrote down today's production, 7727 cans. I said, Pat, I think you made a mistake there. I think that should be 77. Oh, no, he said, I'm to deduct 50 cans. Because I said, why? Oh, he said, a lot of them blow. Now, if you put too much meat in the cans, it would blow. And I mean, that was huge. In Clove Meats in Waterford, if they had 2 cans out of 7,000, there'd be more there, you know. And these kind of things, I knew. And if something like this happened, and I hadn't full knowledge of what to do about it, I say to Mr. Brennan, and he'd call me down to Waterford because they're very busy, and he'd stick me in that department, working in it, you know what I mean? I learned to kill pigs, the lot. I was the worst pig killer in the place, but at least I killed pigs, you know. That's how I learned about it. But, oh yeah, I saw this job advertised for assistant manager in Ayr in Scotland. And the salary was £1,250 a year, and I had 520. And I applied for it. And I was called for an interview. And see, I was in Limerick at the time, and there was a flight from from New York to Shannon, to Prestwick, to Frankfurt. And I could get a ticket on the Prestwick, Shannon Prestwick, and Prestwick was only 2 miles from Ayr. And that's how I got over for the interview, you know. I got the job anyway, and it also included a free flat. And my poor mother didn't know what to do, because she couldn't wish you more than good health and 1,000 a year. And I said, Mommy, I have £1,250. So I left, and I went deeper, and then I went to another cooked meats factory. Oh yeah, that's why I stole his daughter, and away I went.
And did she mind going off?
No, she loved it. She was Alice was great, and she used to say that I used to change my job about every 3 years, and she said I used to change my job because I didn't have to buy her any clothes because all the clothes she had to be still new in the new place we went to. She was great, and then we went to England, and then we came back to Ireland, and then to Clonmel. I was manager of. There was a big factory brought up in Clonmel. I was manager there for a few years, and then of course, the pay was much lower in Ireland than in Britain at the time, but we were home like again, and then I bought a house in you know the price of houses now. I mean ordinary houses. I bought a house on 4.5 acres of land, which had been brought over from America in sections, they dug a big hole 8 foot deep to put the house on it. And then they laid out the gardens, and I had 36 apple trees, 12 pear trees, and 4 plum trees, and I had a kitchen garden and a rose garden. And I saw this too, Sunday Times I saw this advertised, and I only went out of curiosity, you know what I mean? And because they talked about it a lot in America. It was brought over from America in 1955. Now this was 1961. And the fellow who brought it over was, the local said, he was a returned Yank who had more money than sense. He emigrated to America at 17. He spent his whole life in New York, in the mid of New York, and then waiting to return home to the old land. And he bought this, outside a little village called Newcastle. He bought this land, and then he bought over the house and all the rest of it. And then the local said he discovered that most of the people he knew were dead. And the place was too quiet. He couldn't stand the quietness of the place, and he couldn't get rid of it because nobody else wanted it. And he showed me around the place, and I said, Gormley, I think was his name. I said, I'm sorry, Mr. Gormley. He said, but I could never afford this place. And he said, well, how much were you going to buy? Oh, I said, I'd be ashamed to tell you. Well, he forced me. I said, at that time, you buy you buy your house through the bank, and they'd give me $2,000 to buy a house, you see. And I said $2,000, and he said, I'm sorry, but thank you very much, I enjoyed it. About 3 weeks later, he rang me in Clonmel, and he said, make it 2,500, and you can have the place. And I said, I'm sorry, I said, but that's all the bank will give me. And he said, well, you could bloody well ask them. They won't give it to you if you don't ask them. I said, all right, I'll go down and ask them, and I'll come back to you. And I went down to the bank, and he gave me another 300. Big deal. So I rang Mr. Gormley, and I said, I'm terribly sorry, but he'll only go, not 250 more. Yeah, I said, he'd only go up to 2,250. I'm terribly sorry. And he said, I tell you what, he said, if we just leave the place as it is and just get into the car and drive away, will you give me 2,300? And I said, hold on a minute. And you see, there was 2 businesses where I was. There was Clonmel Bacon, who killed pigs, and there was Clonmel Foods, that killed cattle and sheep. And Jim Grace's office, he's the manager of the food, his was next to mine. I went into him, he was on the phone, and I said, Jim, can you lend me £50? I said, go away, I said, I can't go away, yes or no? He said, yes, go away. So I went back into your man, and I said, yes. I signed all the papers on a Tuesday. He left on a Thursday, and Alice and I moved in on the Saturday. And poor Alice, she was terrified. We moved in, and there was sugar in the sugar bowl, and there was milk in the fridge. You know what I mean? And all their clothes were still, there was built-in wardrobes all over the American style, but they were all full. And she was waiting for him to come back and throw us all out. That's, so,
That was weird. Bill, I will stop you. But, can I get you back again in a couple of weeks' time?
I'll try for going on,
No,
son.
no, no,